the infamous Rockford Fosgate Punch HX2. This is the 10-inch. This is a D4. I went ahead and salvaged the cone assembly. Sometimes it's because you want to save the coil, sometimes because you want to save the cone, sometimes you want to save everything. It depends on the client on what they want. The way that you get that off is I just had Sheri use a little baby screwdriver. Micro alarm, little plug for them. You just get in there like that and then just pry it like that. And then you just repeat all over. And it's good for, you know, keeping the wife busy. I pull out the, what is this? The soup strainer. It's supposed to keep debris out of the gap, but it's like, if you're getting debris in your gap, you're basing wrong. Don't put anything in your enclosure. That's all I have to say. No fiberglass, no stuffing. It doesn't need anything. It just needs air. Okay? So, and the way you do that is this little thing sits in there and you can put a chisel in there on the lip and then bang it out on one side, and then you flip it over and you can use a pair of pliers to pull the rest out. It's just glued, and it's a press fit. So, but it's trash. So now it's full. You can, you know, get some room in there, do whatever Peter North and fucking Ron Jeremy shit you want to do. I love this frame. It is the diamond cut, slight. It's not real egregious or anything like that. It's got good spring terminals. I don't like the Power Series, which has the knurled twist terminals. It uses 5-inch bolt hole circle, but it uses American hardware. Quarter 20s, flatheads, usually about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8. And then it uses, I think these are actually M4 star nuts, which is what I like. This was what inspired me. I ended up buying a whole bunch of them. I lost them all. But that's what I like to use, is the M4, because these terminals come from China. There's nothing you could have done about that when these were made. Hand assembled in, because again, I imagine the frame was produced in China, and then I think all the parts were produced in China and then imported here and then assembled at that factory in Rockford. It was in Rockford, Illinois, I think. It was called RAD. It was called Rockford Audio Design. And it used to be Carbonu. It used to be Carbonu Speaker Company. And Rockford bought it in the 90s, and then they used it as an assembly warehouse for the T1, T2, the early ones, the silver frame ones. And then later they just ended up moving production over to China. Or Asia, I should say, because I think they actually have their own factory in like Malaysia or Philippines or something like that. So anyways, I think it's not really an easy way to tell. I think it's aluminum. I want to say the first version of these was copper, and then they changed to a softer suspension to accommodate a lighter coil. So, and if you look at the differences in moving mass from the old ones to the new ones, the old ones wear out the spider. You can see this one's a little bit of cupped just from age, sag. They do age a little sooner. However, they perform better, especially in well, it doesn't matter, sealed or ported. So all of these had a QTC of right around 0.5, 0.665, which is good for sealed or ported. And then if you look at the roll-off on ported, it just performs better than the aluminum version. So, because I wanted to know for myself, so we actually did testing and produced it. So we're going to use, this one's D4, so I'm going to use a D4 copper coil. And then our spider, which is, I think on this one is 8-inch. It might be 8.5. And then getting these rubber surround cones. China does not want, even though the tooling is the same, China does not want to produce rubber cones. There are some disadvantages if you live in cold weather, but I think it's worth it, because if you live in cold weather, you should heat up your cabin anyway with the heater and hot air before you listen to bass, because if you're listening with cold air in your truck, not only can you sometimes damage stuff if it's like really frozen, or if there was moisture and then ice that can cut through the spider or make the surround brittle, but also the air is more dense, and so it's harder to move. So if you're in like a, you know, cold weather country, you know where you're at. You want to turn on the heater, drive, you know, get the engine running and heat up all the air in your cabin before you start really basing. So does cold weather really help the amps? Yeah, but you know, you really shouldn't be heating up the amps too bad anyway. I think that was it for now. Let me put the assembly together and then we'll go from there. I'm going to go ahead and just use my last Lord of Bass spider. These are good spiders, by the way. They're a little stiffer than our factory one. It looks like the landing is a little under 8 inches because this is full 8. So we're going to have to trim up maybe like 1/8 of an inch around the edge. So, but it uses a 3-inch standard coil. I have this copper coil. This is the 180702 from Lord of Bass. It's a little tall. It's a 50 millimeter wind height as compared to the original, which looks like a 35 or even a 40. I can bias it, but otherwise it's probably going to bottom out. So I'm going to see if I can find another coil that's a little bit more shallow, or I might even just salvage this coil if it's still good, which it does. It looks like it's in really good shape. It looks like it just failed on the terminals, which is common. So people just push them too hard. I've seen people really just beat the shit out of these, and they survive, and they somehow think that that's a quality woofer when you can't blow it. I'm like, it might be a little retard proof, but you don't have to test fate. You know what I'm saying? Well, I ended up reusing the old coil. So, and I'm actually going to put a little bit of a layer of epoxy on it. Shows a little bit of separation. I don't know if you can see that right there. It got a little hot. And you can just reinforce it. Otherwise, it's fine. But the rest of it sanded off pretty good. I'm going to use a soft spider. And then we're just going to do, I think, there's a couple of different cone choices I got. But we're going to go ahead and put this in and then terminate it. So I didn't have the paper cone that I want to use. We're just short on supplies right now. But I did find these nice poly cones that I really like because they have a nice rubber surround, which would match what the sub originally had. Oh, and just as a follow-up, see, that looks great. So just as a follow-up on the epoxy on the coil, you want to make sure that you push it into the little grooves so that it's basically just a very light coating. You don't want it to stick out at all because you don't want it to hit the gap. So it's just meant there to go in between the wires. Let me show you. I got to bring my finger into frame. It's just meant to go in between the wires to hold it all together. So, and again, I don't usually do that. I've done it a couple times. And the woofer lasts, 5-10 years, whatever it is. It depends on, it typically always depends on whether or not the woofer is abused. If the woofer is abused, it can last 3 seconds. So it's so funny when I hear people that, when I get feedback from people that hear that, when I say, this woofer could only last 3 seconds, they get mad. And I go, right, but you got to understand that you are abusing it. Maybe you shouldn't abuse that. And so, whatever, and it doesn't matter what they pay. It doesn't matter if it's $100, if it's $500. They still get mad at that information. And then they get mad that I'm laughing at them. And I'm like, I'm not laughing at you per se. I'm just laughing because you're like you're I don't want to say dumb. I want to say you're so ignorant. You don't realize how ignorant you are. And ignorant just means that you don't know. So you don't know so much that you don't know that you don't know, if that makes any sense. So, but let's go ahead and put this cone on. It's going to take a little finesse to get that just right, but I do have a couple spares just in case I mess up. And then just to let you know, what you want to do is, you don't have to do the bottom. What you want to do is the top, and usually I go in there with I just buy the multi-pack from multi-pack of wire wheels from Harbor Freight, and once I get it cut to size, I usually use one that's just the same size, and then what I do is I plunge it through, and then what it does is it roughs up right where the epoxy is going to sit. So, and I would love, like a drill press or something like that of a wire wheel that fit that, but I'm gonna have to do this. Basically, put it on there, center it with the compass. Lay down the line with a mechanical pencil. I use, I think, 0.5 millimeter size. And then what you do is just do it by hand and sit there and rough up underneath where the E6000 is going to stick. So, and I'm also going to do an intercap as well, just to secure that. Even though it's not super powerful, but again, you want to hedge your bets on, and you want to assume that people are going to abuse it. Even though they shouldn't, you still want to give them a little bit extra working room. And it really helps your case when you show them and cut it open, and you're like, it's not supposed to look burned, like this does not happen on its own. And then I've always gotten the guys, you're the one that set my gains, and I'm like, you control the volume, and I just have to bite my tongue to not call them dumb. So, but again, it's about lack of experience. So sometimes, and this is not just me, this is you. If you do any of this kind of work, you're going to run into these folks, and that's just part of the deal. So again, I don't like dealing with the public, and I'm doing my best to get out of that realm and just privately deal with people. So, but right now I'm still having to deal with, anyways, let's finish this up and get this woofer out the door. Love you guys. All right, so we got everything soldered up. I got the cone. I barehanded it. I freestyled it and until it got close, and then I went out back with the angle grinder, and then I just lightly would grind what I thought was even. Again, it just has to be good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I would do a test fit, a dry fit over the former. And so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and, on this particular frame, there's always a gap, which for some reason I'm self-conscious about. So I'm going to go ahead and put epoxy on that for cosmetics, even though you're not really going to see it. Again, that's my OCD, and it's also, I like overbuilding whenever I possibly can. And so that's what I'll do. And then we'll go ahead and put a light bead down here at the base. We'll tuck these in. We will put the cone on. And then I will put a bead on the triple gap, or triple, what is it called? Triple joint, which is just on top of the cone. And then I will line up the mounting holes on the surround, and then we will clamp. We will not glue, we will clamp. And it's just meant to hold it in place. And then later on in the day, I'll come back, flip it up, and then glue down this with some CA, and then clamp it. And then it'll sit overnight. We'll take all that stuff and we'll test drive it. All right, it's the next day, and we can go ahead and remove these clamps. Just a little heads up, the cone wasn't sitting right, and I was like, what's going on? And sometimes it hangs up or something like that. It turns out there was a lead that was folded under this way. It did not make it up through the inside of the cone, and so luckily I caught it. And that's another benefit of not gluing the surround down right away, is that if I did pour the epoxy and the lead was there, you can always cut or burn a hole in the cone and then poke it back up and then do another epoxy application or even seal it up. But again, luckily I avoided that. So you don't want to pull the shims yet, but you do want to make sure they're not sticking to the epoxy. When I poured this, I went back and made sure that didn't happen, and then I also kind of wiped them a little bit. So this one's below the horizon, so it's going to be okay. So that I ended up stuffing it with a little bit of yarn as well. So this is good to go. I'll go ahead and flip this up. We'll apply the CA and clamp it back down, and then once I do that, I will pull the shims. So actually, let me do that real quick. All right, we got that done. So sometimes the surround is not quite meant for the frame that you're using, and so sometimes you just got to be aware of these little holes. You don't want the surround to go sometimes all the way to the edge, and that's why it's important to use slow cure CA. So typically the one that I get is like it's like a gel. It's very, again, a slow cure type, and you go, well, CA is quick, and again, that's why you use the accelerator to speed the process once you have it set. So, but having a slow cure time allows also a little bit of work time, so because sometimes it gets caught up. When I did the Velodyne subwoofer, we had that problem because I was trying to clamp on the front gasket, and it kind of, in a couple spots, it looked like it buckled or kind of warped. It wasn't quite even. And again, that doesn't really affect the performance, but it does affect the cosmetics. So the point here that I'm making about making sure that you don't cover that hole is that when you put a mounting screw in there, sometimes it can pierce this little edge, and then it creates a air hole where it leaks out. So we were having that problem on the Sunfire subwoofer Recones that I was doing. But anyways, this is done. We can pull the shims now. It's all aligned as it's going to be aligned, and that is good. And then we can go ahead and do the inner cap, which I found that CA has a difficult time bonding to the polycone. This epoxy did really, really well, so I prefer this better on this. But there was a lead that was sticking up, and sometimes especially on a paper cone, to get the lead to lay down and stay down, sometimes I'll put a little drop tack weld of CA on it, and then just sit there and blow on it and see if I can get it to cure, and then it holds it in place until I put the epoxy on it. So, but the CA was not bonding to the poly, which was a little frustrating. But you can also see a little bit of where I etched it, scratched it up a little bit so that whatever I did use would bond pretty well. So what we're going to do is do a quick test with the multimeter. I'm not hearing any rubbing, so we're good there. And then we can go ahead and put on the inner cap to keep the back pressure from pushing the outer cap off. Some companies, especially during the 90s and 2000s, they would just rely on an outer cap to be adhered, and there was a bunch of problems with it. And some of it was that manufacturers were lazy. Some of it was that manufacturers were being cheap. And when you look at the numbers of how many returns or complaints that you get out of, say, 1,000 that you produce, it only seems like it's 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever it is. It's a number that you can live with. And to avoid that, I'd rather just put an inner cap on it. Again, it takes a little bit more time, but when you're working with manufacturing, sometimes that's exactly what you're paying for, is the time. And so if you want to maximize margins, sometimes you cut corners, and that's one of the corners they cut. Now, this one soaked through a little bit more than I wanted to. Sometimes they will drip. I think we're okay. But when I do the inner cap, I can go ahead and fill that part in, and then go ahead and set the inner dust caps on it. So again, I'm going to do the 2 paper. Or what I do is I laminate them together. So I'll put a bead, like a spiral of epoxy on it. I stick it to the other one. I twist them together so that it spreads out the epoxy, and then I lay them down like that. I put a little weight right here, which is like this, and then I lay the bead, and then I let that set. It'll set till later today, and then I can go ahead and put on the outer cap, which is a Rockford Fosgate. It's the original Punch HX2. So I'll see you in a little bit. Everything turned out good. Sometimes you want to come up and press on it to make sure that the epoxy didn't drip into the gap. And so everything turned out good. I went ahead and signed it. I couldn't find my little abrasive disc. And so what I did was, this is just poly, so I just used the tip of a razor to scrape it and make little marks in it so that it would rough it up. Now, sometimes people use CA. I'm not a big fan of CA on poly. Some people use E6000. So sometimes E6000 tends to warp poly, and so I don't really like E6000 for that as well. So 5-minute epoxy from JB Weld is great, you know, from the Walmart or whatever. And then of course Devil's Jizz, if you have Devil's Jizz. I kind of like Devil's Jizz because it has a black glossy finish. And so if some leaks out a little bit, you know, this is it right here. So if it leaks out a little bit, you know, it doesn't look too horrible. So, also I wanted to give you a note. Sometimes if you're measuring, I measured with the compass. I found the compass back here in a bunch of tools, moving stuff around. Sometimes when you measure, it'll be off. Like, it won't be even. And so what happens at that point, what that means is that the cone is a little warped. And so you have to kind of just eyeball it. And what I usually do is I stand over it, look down, and then I close one eye, and then you sit there and adjust, spin, and you do that until you feel like it's even all the way around. So, and then what I did was I put a little weight on it, went back with a mechanical pencil, traced it. That's what you see there. I don't know if you can see that. Let me get this off. See right there? And then underneath that, that's where I roughed it up. So I think some of that 5-minute epoxy will work great. And then the next time I go to the Valley, I can drop this off to the client. So each terminal turned out to be right at 4 ohm, which I thought was fantastic. Other than that, it's got a good 20 years of service left on it. So I also got to find the wraparound. I put it somewhere. But that's it. Let me show you some woofer porn, and then we'll get out of here.